There is a moment in almost every relationship where confusion becomes louder than clarity. You start asking questions you never thought you'd ask. You replay conversations. You analyze silence. You hold on to small moments of affection, like they are proof of something bigger. And deep inside, you already feel the truth, but you keep negotiating with it. Because letting go feels harder than hoping. There is a point in every emotional connection where clarity starts whispering, but attachment starts shouting over it. You feel it in the quiet moments. You feel it when you send a message and stare at the screen a little too long. You feel it when you start adjusting your behavior just to keep someone interested in you. And slowly, without even noticing, you begin to abandon your own emotional needs just to keep a connection alive. But here's the truth most people avoid. Love does not require you to constantly earn your place in it. When someone truly loves you, you don't spend most of your time wondering where you stand. You don't feel like you are competing with distractions, excuses, or emotional distance. You feel met. You feel seen. You feel like your presence actually matters, not just your effort to stay present. But when love is not real or not mutual, something very specific begins to happen. You become the one who initiates everything. You become the one who repairs every silence. You become the one who interprets every cold reply in the most generous way possible just to protect your hope. And over time, this doesn't feel like connection anymore. It feels like emotional labor with no guarantee of return. And yet, you stay because the mind remembers the best moments and tries to make them permanent. It tells you that the version of her who once cared deeply is still there, just hidden. But what it doesn't tell you is that consistency reveals truth more than memory ever will. Real love is not defined by occasional warmth. It is defined by emotional reliability. If someone can make you feel deeply important one day and completely invisible the next, that is not depth, that is instability. And your nervous system begins to carry the weight of that instability. You start overthinking simple replies. You start reading silence like a message. You start living in emotional uncertainty instead of emotional safety. And perhaps the most painful part is how slowly it happens. No one suddenly becomes unimportant. It is a gradual process where your needs are minimized in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A delayed response becomes normal. A canceled plan becomes understandable. A lack of effort becomes something you excuse. Until one day you realize you have built a connection where you are constantly adjusting, but never truly receiving. At some point, you must ask yourself a difficult question. If I stopped trying, would this connection still exist? Because that question reveals everything you need to know. Love that depends entirely on your effort is not love that sustains you. It is love that drains you. And still, letting go is not easy, because emotional attachment does not dissolve just because truth appears. You don't just lose a person, you lose the version of the future you built around them. But staying in something that requires you to shrink yourself emotionally will cost you far more than the pain of leaving ever will. Because real connection does not leave you guessing your worth. It confirms it through presence, through consistency, through care that does not require negotiation. And anything less than that slowly teaches you to tolerate emotional absence while calling it love. And the moment you finally stop trying to convince someone to meet you where they never intended to stand, you begin to return to yourself in ways you didn't realize you had lost. There is a kind of silence in relationships that speaks louder than words ever could. It is not the silence of peace, but the silence of distance. You feel it when someone stops asking about your day. You feel it when their curiosity about your inner world fades. You feel it when your presence becomes predictable instead of cherished. And slowly, without a dramatic ending, something quietly shifts. You are still there, but not truly met anymore. And in that space, the mind begins its greatest struggle. It tries to explain what the heart already feels. It creates reasons, excuses, possibilities. They're busy. They're stressed. They don't mean it like that. And while some of that may be true in moments, truth is not measured in isolated moments. It is measured in patterns. Because love, real love, has a rhythm to it. It doesn't always have to be loud, but it is consistent. It returns. It checks in. It makes space. And when that rhythm is gone, you don't just feel ignored. You start feeling emotionally displaced, as if you are standing in a place where you no longer fully belong. One of the clearest signs that someone does not truly love you is when you begin to shrink yourself to maintain their comfort. You start filtering your emotions. You stop expressing needs because you fear being too much. You become overly careful with your words, your timing, your expectations. And without realizing it, you begin to live in a version of yourself that is easier for them to tolerate, but harder for you to recognize. There is a quiet tragedy in this process, because you think you are preserving the relationship, but what you are actually doing is slowly erasing your own emotional authenticity. You are trading clarity for access. You are trading self-respect for proximity. And over time, that trade never feels equal. It always leaves you feeling smaller. And then comes the confusion phase, where inconsistency becomes normal. One day they are warm, present, engaging. The next day they are distant, unavailable, emotionally absent, and your mind starts working overtime to decode it. You begin analyzing tone, timing, energy shifts. You start believing that if you understand them better, you can fix the instability. But emotional inconsistency is not a puzzle to solve. It is a message to understand. Because someone who truly loves you does not keep you in a constant state of guessing. They do not make you feel like you have to earn their emotional availability repeatedly. They do not create a dynamic where your peace depends on their mood. And yet, many people stay in this cycle because of brief moments of connection. A kind message here, a warm gesture there. And those moments become powerful enough to override the larger pattern. But occasional warmth is not the same as consistent love. One feeds hope, the other builds security. Eventually, something inside you begins to tire, not from loving them, but from constantly adjusting yourself just to stay connected. And that exhaustion is not weakness. It is awareness trying to break through. Because deep down, you already know when something is mutual and when it is one-sided. You already feel the imbalance before you can fully name it. The real struggle is not understanding the truth, it is accepting it. And acceptance feels heavy because it forces you to release not just a person, but an emotional investment, a future you imagined, a version of connection you kept hoping would return. But there is a point where holding on stops being love and starts becoming self-neglect. And in that moment, choosing yourself is not loss, it is restoration. There is a moment in every emotional bond where reality quietly starts speaking, but hope keeps interrupting. It doesn't arrive as a breakup or a clear ending. It arrives as distance you can't quite explain, effort that feels uneven, and a strange feeling in your chest that something essential is no longer being returned to you. And yet, instead of listening to that feeling, most people begin to negotiate with it. They remember the good days. They replay the rare moments of closeness. They hold on to potential as if potential is the same as presence. But potential is not love. Potential is imagination trying to survive reality. When someone truly loves you, you don't spend most of your emotional energy trying to feel secure in their presence. You don't analyze their behavior like a puzzle that changes every day. You don't find yourself shrinking your needs just to avoid overwhelming them. Love, in its healthiest form, does not make you feel like you are asking for too much just for wanting consistency. But when love is absent or incomplete, something subtle begins to happen. You start overfunctioning. You become the one who explains more, gives more, waits more. You begin to carry the emotional weight of two people, believing that if you just try a little harder, the connection will finally stabilize. But imbalance does not become balance through effort alone. It becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion is often the point where truth begins to surface. Because a person can only ignore emotional reality for so long before their body starts reacting to it. You feel anxious without reason. You feel relief when they respond, and emptiness when they don't. You start measuring your day by their attention. And slowly your nervous system learns to associate love, not with safety, but with uncertainty. That is not connection. That is conditioning. One of the clearest signs that someone does not truly love you is inconsistency that never resolves. Not the occasional mistake, not human imperfection, but a pattern where you never quite know where you stand. One day you are valued, the next you are distant. One moment you are important, the next you are optional. And in that emotional instability, your mind begins to work overtime, trying to create stability that the other person is not providing. But here is a truth that is difficult to accept. Clarity does not come from trying harder to understand someone's inconsistency. Clarity comes from recognizing what consistency would have felt like if it were real. Because real love is not confusing in its foundation. It may have challenges, but it does not repeatedly erase your sense of belonging. It does not make you question your worth as a constant side effect of being connected to it. And yet, many people stay not because they don't see the truth, but because they are emotionally invested in what the truth would cost them. Letting go feels like losing a future they already built in their mind. It feels like erasing meaning from something they gave so much of themselves to. But staying in something that continuously requires you to abandon your own emotional needs is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment disguised as hope. And there comes a moment where you have to ask yourself honestly, am I being loved? Or am I just being tolerated between periods of distance? Because the answer to that question changes everything. The moment you stop chasing consistency from someone who never learned how to give it, you begin to recover a part of yourself that was slowly being given away. And in that return to yourself, you don't just find peace. You find clarity strong enough to finally move forward. There is a kind of heartbreak that doesn't arrive with a dramatic ending. It arrives slowly, almost invisibly, in the form of emotional inconsistency. At first, you don't even name it as a problem. You just feel slightly confused more often than you feel secure. You find yourself rereading messages, rethinking conversations, and trying to decode moods that should never have required decoding in the first place. And still, you stay, because the mind is always trying to protect what the heart has already invested in. It creates explanations to soften the discomfort. It says maybe they are just busy, or maybe they express love differently, or maybe I am expecting too much. But over time, you begin to realize something important. Clarity does not require constant interpretation. It either exists or it doesn't. When someone truly loves you, your presence does not feel uncertain. You do not have to question your place in their life repeatedly. You do not feel like you are standing at the edge of their attention, hoping not to be forgotten. Love, when it is real and grounded, does not leave you guessing your importance. But when love is not fully there, you begin to experience a very specific emotional pattern. You become the one who reaches out first, the one who sustains conversation, the one who notices the emotional gaps and tries to close them. You become more invested in maintaining connection than receiving connection. And slowly, without noticing, your emotional world begins to revolve around someone who is not revolving around you. That imbalance is not always loud. In fact, it is often quiet enough to ignore. A delayed reply becomes normal. A missed effort becomes understandable. A lack of emotional presence becomes something you rationalize instead of question. But every time you rationalize it, you move a little further away from your own emotional truth. And your body knows it before your mind admits it. You feel it in the tightening of your thoughts when they don't respond. You feel it in the relief when they finally show attention. You feel it in the anxiety that replaces peace. This is not love creating excitement. This is uncertainty creating dependency. One of the clearest signs that someone does not fully love you is not cruelty or rejection. It is inconsistency without repair. It is when closeness comes without stability, when affection appears without commitment, when presence is temporary rather than dependable. And in that environment, your nervous system starts learning a dangerous lesson, that love must be earned repeatedly, not received naturally. But real connection does not operate that way. Real connection does not require you to shrink your needs just to keep it alive. It does not make you feel like asking for basic emotional presence is an inconvenience. It does not force you to overthink your worth in someone's life. And yet, many people remain in these dynamics because of moments. Brief moments of warmth become powerful enough to override long periods of distance. A single kind interaction becomes evidence that things could be different. But possibility is not reality. Occasional care is not consistent love. Eventually, something within you begins to wear down, not your capacity to love, but your willingness to abandon yourself in order to be loved back. And that is where awakening begins, not in anger, but in exhaustion that turns into clarity. Because you begin to understand that love should not feel like emotional instability. It should not make you question your value every other day. It should not require you to chase what should naturally stay. And the moment you stop chasing emotional certainty from someone who never offers it consistently, you start reclaiming something far more important than the relationship itself. You start reclaiming your peace, your stability, and your sense of self. There is a quiet kind of heartbreak that does not announce itself loudly. It doesn't always come with arguments or endings or dramatic goodbyes. Sometimes it comes as silence that lasts a little too long. Sometimes it comes as effort that is never matched. Sometimes it comes as the slow realization that you are the one holding the connection together, while the other person simply exists within it. And in the beginning, you don't question it. You adjust. You understand. You give space. You tell yourself that love requires patience. But over time, patience starts turning into waiting. And waiting starts turning into something heavier, uncertainty that never fully resolves. When someone truly loves you, you don't feel like you are constantly proving your place in their life. You don't feel like your presence is optional or interchangeable. You don't feel like you have to earn basic attention or emotional consistency. Love in its natural form creates a sense of grounding. It does not keep you suspended in confusion. But when that grounding is missing, something subtle begins to happen inside you. You start over-explaining your emotions. You start softening your needs so they don't feel like pressure. You start celebrating small gestures as if they are rare gifts instead of basic signs of care. And slowly, your emotional standards begin to shrink, not because you want less, but because you are trying to avoid losing what little you are receiving. That is where emotional imbalance begins to feel normal. You begin to notice patterns. You are the one initiating conversations more often. You are the one repairing misunderstandings. You are the one remembering important details, checking in, staying present. Meanwhile, their presence becomes inconsistent, unpredictable, sometimes warm, sometimes distant. And instead of questioning the pattern, you start questioning yourself. Am I asking for too much? Am I being too sensitive? Should I be more understanding? But real love does not require you to constantly doubt your emotional reality. It does not make you feel like clarity is something you must negotiate for. It does not leave you analyzing tone, timing, or attention just to feel secure for a moment. And yet, the mind tries to hold on. It remembers the best versions of the connection. It recalls moments of closeness and warmth and builds hope around them. But hope, when disconnected from consistency, becomes a cycle of emotional waiting rather than emotional fulfillment. One of the most painful realizations in these situations is that you can love someone deeply and still not be met with the same emotional depth in return. And that mismatch does not always show itself in obvious rejection. It shows itself in absence of effort, in lack of consistency, in emotional unpredictability that slowly drains your sense of stability. Over time, your nervous system begins to adapt to that instability. You feel relief when they respond, anxiety when they don't. You start associating love with uncertainty instead of safety. And when love starts feeling like unpredictability, it stops being nourishment and starts becoming stress. But perhaps the hardest truth to accept is this. You already know when something is not mutual. You already feel it long before you are ready to admit it. The confusion is not the problem. The attachment to what you hoped it would become is. And that attachment is powerful. It makes you tolerate emotional distance longer than you should. It makes you stay in situations where you are consistently giving more than you are receiving. It makes you believe that if you just adjust a little more, wait a little longer, understand a little deeper, things might finally balance out. But imbalance does not correct itself through endurance alone. At some point, you begin to feel the exhaustion of constantly reaching for something that never fully reaches back. And that exhaustion is not weakness, it is awareness beginning to surface. Because real love does not require you to abandon yourself in order to keep it alive. It does not ask you to shrink your needs to make space for someone else's inconsistency. It does not make you question your worth just to maintain access to it. And the moment you finally stop overextending yourself for emotional connection that is not meeting you halfway, you begin to recover something you didn't realize you were losing: your clarity, your peace, and your ability to choose yourself without guilt. There is a point in emotional connection where confusion stops being a phase and starts becoming a pattern. At first, it feels subtle. You tell yourself you are just overthinking. You tell yourself that love is not always consistent, that people have their own ways of expressing care, that patience is part of every relationship. But slowly, what begins as patience turns into emotional uncertainty that you can no longer ignore. And the strange thing about this kind of experience is that it rarely breaks you all at once. It breaks you in small adjustments. You stop expecting replies at a certain time. You stop expecting effort unless you initiate it. You stop expecting consistency and start celebrating minimal attention as something meaningful. And without realizing it, your emotional baseline keeps lowering. Not because you are asking for too much, but because you are receiving too little. When someone truly loves you, you do not feel like you are standing outside their emotional world, waiting for occasional access. You feel included. You feel acknowledged. You feel like your presence is naturally part of their life, not something they have to remember to engage with. Love does not require constant decoding when it is real. It may not be perfect, but it is stable enough that your mind is not always in a state of analysis. But when love is not truly there, something very specific begins to happen. You become hyper-aware of changes in tone, delays in response, shifts in energy. You start interpreting silence in multiple ways, trying to find meaning in absence. And this is where emotional exhaustion begins, not from the absence of communication, but from the effort of constantly trying to interpret it. You may notice that you are the one initiating most conversations. You are the one maintaining emotional momentum. You are the one checking in, repairing gaps, keeping things alive. And over time, that role becomes exhausting because it is not mutual. It is maintenance without partnership. And yet, what makes this so difficult to recognize is the occasional moments of warmth. A kind message here. A brief moment of attention there. These moments create hope. They remind you of what could be. But consistency is not built on moments. It is built on patterns. And when the pattern is in balance, The moments of care only make the inconsistency more confusing, not more meaningful. One of the clearest signs that someone does not love you in the way you need is emotional unpredictability that never resolves. Not occasional distance, but a recurring cycle of closeness and withdrawal that leaves you constantly adjusting your emotional state. And in that adjustment, you begin to lose your own stability. You start waking up and checking your phone not from excitement, but from uncertainty. You feel a shift in mood based on whether they showed up or didn't. Your emotional world begins to orbit around someone who is not consistently present in yours. And slowly your peace becomes dependent on their behavior. But here is what often goes unspoken. Deep down, you already know. You already feel the imbalance long before you can explain it. The hesitation, the overthinking, the emotional tension, they are not confusion. They are awareness trying to break through attachment. Because attachment does something powerful. It makes you tolerate emotional inconsistency longer than you normally would. It makes you normalize effort imbalance. It makes you believe that if you just understand more, give more, wait more, things will eventually align. But emotional alignment does not come from endurance alone. At some point, something inside you gets tired. Not tired of loving, but tired of overextending. Tired of waiting for consistency that never fully arrives. Tired of explaining away your own emotional needs just to preserve connection. And that exhaustion is not failure. It is truth rising to the surface. Because real love does not require you to lose yourself in order to maintain it. It does not make you question your worth repeatedly. It does not turn your emotional needs into something you feel guilty for having. And the moment you stop chasing emotional certainty from someone who cannot consistently provide it, you begin to return to yourself. And in that return, you find something far more powerful than attachment. You find clarity strong enough to choose peace over uncertainty, and yourself over confusion.